So, we're going to look at spiritual maturity, what it actually means, and what it actually means for us who aren't monks in caves. For those of us who have jobs, relationships, and Netflix subscriptions. For those of us living in what we call a privileged world. Even if that privilege feels complicated, incomplete, and comes with its own form of suffering. So let's begin. Let's begin with a story. It's 2 a.m. in a hospice. A man named Matthew is dying, and he's terrified, absolutely convinced he's going to hell because of who he is, because of his sexual orientation, because of the fundamentalist Christian upbringing that taught him God's wrath was waiting for him. Now, Frank, the hospice director, has tried everything. He's created this beautiful altar with a Buddha statue, healing imagery, sacred music, but Matthew is still thrashing, moaning, shouting in agony. The fear is eating him alive. So Frank drives home, exhausted. He searches through his childhood mementos and finds this tiny 5-inch plastic Jesus figurine. The kind you get at your first communion if you were into that practice. He drives back to the hospice, takes down the Buddha statue, and puts up this cheap plastic Jesus. And then the most extraordinary thing happens. A cleaning team member named Dina walks in. She starts to mop the floor. She sees the plastic Jesus, sets her mops aside, and says with genuine enthusiasm, "Merciful Jesus, when His kindness is with us, everything is all right." Now Matthew's face turns to look at the altar, then to Dina, and his entire body relaxes. In that moment, the punishing God of his childhood transforms into merciful God he also knew and loved. The God who adores all his children, no matter what. And Frank leaves them together. They don't need him anymore. And this is what spiritual maturity looks like. Not Frank's sophisticated understanding of different traditions, not his carefully curated altar, not even his compassionate effort for help. It's Dina mopping floors at 2 a.m., so secure in God's love that her simple faith lends Matthew exactly the strength he needs. She wasn't a spiritual teacher. She hadn't studied any masters or doctoral fellowships. She didn't have a meditation practice or a certification or an Instagram following. Maybe she did, but that was something else. She just knew something deep in her bones, and she spoke it naturally. The way you would comment on weather. When His kindness is with us, everything is all right. 7 words. That's it. So this is the first thing I want us to understand about spiritual maturity. It's not something you acquire. It's something you remember. And it shows up through whoever you are, doing whatever you're doing. And I invite you to just let it sink in. Now, as it sinks in, let's talk about us. You and me. The ones listening, and me. We live in an unprecedented time. I can teach you mindfulness here on Insight Timer or on YouTube. You can study Zen poems on YouTube, Vedanta on a different app, Christian contemplation on another platform. You can do weekend retreats, online courses, teacher trainings. You can get certified in 17 different healing modalities before lunch today. That is extraordinary. Really, our ancestors would have walked across continents for access to teachings we can stream while we are stuck in traffic. Now, here's the trap with that. And I see this all the time in my coaching practice. We start to believe that spiritual maturity is something we acquire rather than something we remember. We think it's out there in the perfect teaching, in the right teacher, the correct technique, the next course, the deeper practice. But if we search long enough, try hard enough, optimize efficiently enough, we might achieve spiritual maturity. But we become spiritual consumers, building our cart with practices and teachings always one click away from enlightenment. There's another story about a wealthy oil magnate who visits Picasso's studio. He wants to buy a Picasso, maybe even commission one, but he has one request. He says, "Could you make it a little more realistic?" Picasso asked what he means by realistic. The man pulls out his wallet and shows Picasso a small photograph of his wife, and he says, "Like this." Picasso looks at the photo and says, "She's rather small, isn't she? And kind of flat." We do this with our spiritual lives. We carry around these wallet-sized photos, our ideas of what awakening should look like, what peace should feel like, what a mature practice should produce. And we ask reality to conform to our little pictures. Could you make it little bit more realistic? Reality looks at our pictures and says, "That's rather small, isn't it? And kind of flat." Kind of interesting to really look into some of these traditions. Consciousness is like a crystal. In its purest state, it's luminous, open, fertile, containing all possibilities. When you shine light through a crystal, you get a full spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. Similarly, when people have deep spiritual realizations, they experience different wavelengths of awakening. Some people realize everything is love. Others experience profound peace, that all shall be well and all manner of things shall be well. Some touches emptiness, not a lack of things, but the fertile void from which all things are born. Others see the luminous intensity of existence, the tree with lights in it, the universe glowing. Some realize the purity underneath all suffering. Others experience the wholeness, the oneness, the great web connecting everything. Now, all of these are real, and all of these are valid. But here's what happens, especially in our world of spiritual options. We find our wavelength and think we found the truth rather than our truth or a truth. Then we get territorial. My practice is bigger than yours. We trademark our awakening. We create hierarchies. Well, you've accessed peace, but have you touched the void? The void is deeper. Or love is beautiful, but emptiness is the real deal. Or the meditation states are nice, but service is what truly matters. We dismiss other paths as less evolved, less pure, less effective. And this is the opposite of spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is about celebrating the different wavelengths, not fighting over them. It's recognizing that the Buddhist practitioner accessing vast stillness, the Christian mystic dissolving into divine love, the secular meditator finding deep peace, the karma yogi losing themselves in service. They're all touching the same light, just through different facets of the same crystal. In our world of abundance, this matters enormously because we can spend decades shopping for the right path, constantly wondering if we should switch from mindfulness to Vedanta, from Zen to Tibetan Buddhism, from meditation practices to devotional practices. Or we can mature into understanding that our work is to go deep into whatever wavelength genuinely calls to us, while honoring that others are doing the same through their different options. And your job, and I'm speaking now to those of us who teach, who mentor, is to empower people to trust their wavelength, not to convert them to yours, not to convince them that your flavor is somehow superior, but to help them to go deeper into their own authentic connection with what is sacred. It's a beautiful saying by Jack Kornfield to celebrate that each person will have their own way of touching what is holy or sacred or beyond themselves. How do we do it? The heart that is ready for everything, not the heart that has figured out everything, not the heart that has perfected itself, not the heart that only opens when conditions are favorable, but the heart that is ready for everything. This is considered the highest happiness. Not getting what we want, not having things go our way, but the deep trust that we don't have to tense against the future, that we can open to what it's here and live it. Now, here's what I notice in my own life and in working with people. In our privileged world, we often have the luxury of avoiding this kind of maturity. We can curate our lives. We can unsubscribe, unfollow, mute, block, opt out. We can begin to build elaborate systems to keep discomfort at bay. We can choose our news sources, our social circles, our content feeds, all designed to minimize this friction and maximize comfort. And by the way, I'm not saying this is a wrong practice. Boundaries are healthy. Protecting your energy is wise. But there's a shadow side which I'm speaking about. We can mistake this spiritual bypassing of spiritual maturity. We can confuse avoiding difficulty with transcending it. We can build a practice that works beautifully in perfect conditions but crumbles the moment reality refuses to cooperate. So this is something like until we can't curate anymore, until the diagnosis comes, or the relationship ends, or the depression hits, or the parent dies, or the panic attack arrives, or the world catches fire in ways we cannot ignore. And then we discover whether our practice has been decorative or structural. Has it been the nice paint on the walls or the actual foundation holding up the place? So, the idea, the heart ready for everything, is built in the mess, not in the retreat. It's built when you're stuck in traffic and late for an important meeting. It's built when your teenager slams the door in your face. It's built when your body hurts and the meditation isn't helping right now. It's built when you view the news and it's unbearable and you can't look away. It's built when you have disappointed yourself again. This is where the real practice lives. This is where maturity happens. Not in finally getting it right, but in learning to be steady when everything is wrong. Here's another story. A couple from Michigan decides to vacation in Florida. For our American counterparts, that might be easier, where they honeymooned. But because of scheduling conflicts, the husband goes first to Florida. He arrives, checks into the hotel, sees a computer in his room, and decides to send an email to his wife. This was before mobile phones, etc. But in her email address, he makes a typo and leaves out one letter. Meanwhile, in Houston, far away from there, a woman has just returned from her husband's funeral. He was a minister who died suddenly of a heart attack. Devastated, she decides to check her email. She opens the first message and faints. Her son rushes in, and here's what's on screen. To my loving wife, subject, I have arrived. I know you are surprised to hear from me. They have computers here now. You're allowed to send emails to your loved ones. I've just arrived and checked in. I see that everything has been prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then. Hope your journey is an eventful one, unlike mine. P.S. Sure is hot down here. Real, but not true. The email is real, the fear is real, the interpretation is real, but not true. This story may bring about a laugh in us because we recognize ourselves in it. We recognize how quickly our minds create catastrophic interpretations, how completely we believe in our thoughts. And I want to pause here because this might be the most practical teaching in spiritual maturity for those of us swimming in information, drowning in feeds, scrolling through carefully curated presentations of other people's supposedly perfect lives. The thoughts are happening, they are real. Anxiety about the future, real. The comparison to others, real. The story about that comment, what that comment meant, real. The fear about what might happen, real. The narrative about why you are not enough, also real. But not true. Spiritual maturity is developing the knack, the knack of catching yourself living inside your stories. Not eliminating the stories. That's impossible and probably not even desirable. Stories help us make sense of experience. They are how we navigate reality. But noticing when you have mistaken the map for the territory, when you have consumed the wallet photo for the actual person, or when you have believed the email from hell. And then this mature part, with something like kindness, with something like humor, putting the story down and coming back to what's actually here. The rain is falling, the body is breathing. The person in front of you, this moment, just this. Let me give you a personal example. Last week I had a meditation session that I was convinced would be poorly attended. I had this whole story. People are losing interest. The algorithm is burying my content. I'm not as relevant as I thought I would be or I'm used to be. This is the beginning of the end. Real thoughts, real anxiety, real narratives. I showed up anyway. 40 people joined. Beautiful session. Heartfelt comments afterwards. The story was real. It was genuinely happening in my mind, creating this genuine anxiety in my body. But it is not true. How much of our suffering happens in the space between what is real and true? As we take it all in, I want you to notice what is here. So there's a workshop on mindfulness and compassion that happened in Germany. They've been teaching about forgiveness, about loving kindness, about opening the heart. After a day or two, a woman in the back of the room stands up. She says, I've been listening to your talk about forgiveness, but my father was a prisoner in the concentration camps, and I can't forgive his killers. My heart is like ice. The whole room goes silent. The teacher does not know what to say. They just sit in silence, bearing witness to the depth of that pain. Then another woman on the other side of the room raises her hand. The teacher thinks, okay, now all the stories from the war are going to pour out. But this woman stands up and says, my heart is like ice too. It feels like stone. My father was a Nazi officer who was a guard in the camps, and I know that he killed people, and I can't forgive him. The silence deepens. And then these two women do the bravest thing. They cross the room and embrace each other. They don't say a word, they don't have to, they just hold each other. Their action is a recognition that they are no longer in their pain. For this moment, their suffering is our suffering. that the tears they carry are the tears of the world. I invite you to sit with this for a moment, because here's what a spiritually mature practice looks like when it's not theatrical, when it's not a podcast, when it's not a nice idea for a book. It looks like crossing the room. Not because you have forgived anything, not because you have worked through your trauma, not because you have found the right technique or done enough therapy or meditated long enough, but because in that moment you recognize that the walls separating us are no longer holding us back. The challenging part for those of us in this privileged world we live in, the part I think about constantly, we are simultaneously both of them. We are the children of victims and the children of perpetrators. We benefit from systems that harm others. We are harmed by the systems that benefit others. Our comfort is often subsidized by someone else's suffering. Our suffering is often ignored because of someone else's comfort. Maybe my meditation practice happens on technology built by underpaid workers. The food I eat comes from systems that exploit farmers. The peace I experience is partially enabled by privileges others don't have. And simultaneously, I carry my own legitimate suffering, my own real pain, my own struggles that don't disappear just because others have it worse. Spiritual maturity doesn't resolve this paradox. It learns to hold it. It learns to cross the room anyway, to stay connected to both our privilege and our pain, to both our complicity and our compassion, to both our responsibility and our limits. It learns to embrace what seems unforgivable, including in ourselves. So, what happens when we want our awakening on Amazon Prime? Guaranteed delivery in 2 days or less, with same day shipping available in certain areas. We measure our meditation practice in our consecutive days on the app. We track our progress with metrics and milestones. We expect visible results from reasonable effort. And when it doesn't work the way, when we meditate for months and still get anxious, when we practice loving kindness and still feel irritated, angry, when we do all the things right and still suffer, we think we are doing it wrong. So instead of wondering why that is affecting us, the rhythms of the universe are not the rhythms of the engineer. Spiritual maturity is developing trust in rhythms that we haven't learned to recognize. Is planting seeds we may never see bloom. Is doing the work even when we can't measure the impact. Is showing up even when nothing seems to be happening. Is trusting that something is unfolding that's bigger than our small timeline. This doesn't mean passive acceptance, but the engagement comes from love and trust, not just anxiety and urgency. It comes from the vastness of patience, not a cup of panic. And that is hard, really hard, especially when this world is on fire, especially when people are suffering, especially when we see exactly what needs to change. And here's what I'm learning: the quality of our action matters as much as the action itself. Action that comes from fear and desperation creates more fear and desperation. Action that comes from love and patience creates more love and patience. And this patience doesn't make us passive, it makes us sustainable. There's another wonderful story about Nisargadatta, this fierce Indian sage who taught from a tiny apartment in Bombay, Mumbai. And whenever you come to see him, you wouldn't just sit there quietly in the back and work your way up to talking to the guru. You'd walk straight in. He'd point to a spot and immediately ask, "So, what brings you? Where are you from?" You could answer that on any level you dared. One day, an Australian fellow shows up and asks some decent questions, gets some answers from Nisargadatta, and then leaves to party for the weekend in the beaches of Goa, as we all do. A couple days later, someone raises their hand. What will happen to that guy? He came, asked meaningful questions, got some wisdom, and then decided to go to the beach instead. Is there hope for this fellow? Nisargadatta shakes his head and says, "It's too late." People ask, "What do you mean it's too late?" It's too late because that place in him that knows who he is has already started to awaken. He can go to the beach for a while, but it's too late for him. He's already started the transformation. So, in that same vein, if you're listening to this, it might be too late for you. Something has already started. Some seed has already been planted. Some question has already been asked. You can ignore it. You can distract yourself. You can go to the beach. You can tell yourself it's not real or not important or it's not the right time. But that knowing is here. That sense that there's something more than just getting through the day. That suspicion that you are bigger than your thoughts about yourself. That glimpse, however brief, of something vast and loving and possible is already happened. And here's the gift. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to find the perfect practice or the right teacher or the right technique. You don't have to become someone else or fix everything that's wrong with you or achieve special state. You just have to stop abandoning yourself. You just have to trust that awakening is already happening, that consciousness is already opening to itself through you in whatever flavor of the crystal is yours. The question isn't whether you're spiritual enough or mature enough or awakened enough. The question is, are you paying attention? Because it's already here. In fact, it's been here all along. And it's too late for you now, in the most beautiful way possible. So here's what I invite you to do today. A simple practice that honors everything we've explored. At some point today, pause. Not during a meditation, not during your yoga practice, not during your dedicated spiritual practice time, but during something ordinary, something mundane, something like walking, something like waiting in line, something like walking to your office while you're making coffee. Just maybe for a moment, see if you can find this seed that you have planted. The sense that vast and loving that's always been there. Just noticing if it's already here. And if you can't find it, that's fine too. That's also the practice. The willingness to look, the willingness to pause, the willingness to remember. That's spiritual maturity. Not dramatic awakenings, though those are beautiful when they come, and they will come. But the quiet, persistent willingness to turn towards what's true, even when you can't see it clearly. In fact, especially when you can't see it clearly, because it's already here. You're already home. You've arrived. Exactly where you've always been. Welcome. Thank you for practicing with me today. If this talk resonated with you, please feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below if you're on YouTube watching this, or send me a message on Insight Timer or any other places. I'm always available. I love to hear what landed for you. And remember, your garden can never be taken from you. So until tomorrow morning, same time, same practice, different moment. Be well. Thank you.